Within the first hour of entering the cabin, we counted several impossibilities. Footsteps overhead when there was no second floor. Whispers in a language we couldn't identify. A door that was open one moment and locked the next. All of this while stranded miles from the nearest town, with no way to call for help. By the third hour, we stopped counting. The safe, rational world we thought we knew unraveled thread by thread, as a chill seeped into our bones with each unexplained sound. In this video, I'll take you minute by minute through the most terrifying night of our lives and explain why, even now, I sometimes wake up hearing those same whispers. It all started with a plume of white smoke billowing from under the hood of our sedan. The engine sputtered 3 times before dying completely, leaving us stranded on a desolate stretch of highway cutting through dense forest. My wife Anna and I looked at each other with that particular blend of frustration and resignation that only car trouble in the middle of nowhere can bring. "Of all the places to break down," Anna muttered, already pulling out her phone. "No signal. Perfect. I tried mine too. Nothing." I recalled in a sinking panic that our GPS had dimmed to nothing about 2 hours earlier. At the time, I'd written it off as a glitch, following the road signs instead. Now that coincidence felt significantly more unsettling. We started walking as afternoon faded toward evening. The air grew chillier with each step, our breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the darkening sky. The barren road stretched endlessly through the woods, the fading daylight casting long shadows through the pines. After what felt like hours of walking in uncomfortable silence, Anna suddenly grabbed my arm.
"Look through those trees."
"Is that a cabin?" I squinted through the dimming light. Sure enough, nestled in a small clearing about 50 yards from the road, stood a wooden cabin. Relief washed over me at the prospect of warmth, shelter, maybe even a landline phone. Yet, as we approached, something about the structure seemed wrong.
"Does it look different to you now?"
Anna whispered as we got closer. I swear it had a peaked roof when I first spotted it. She was right. The cabin's appearance subtly shifted as we approached. The angle of the roof, the number of visible windows, even its apparent size fluctuated depending on our perspective. I wanted to blame it on twilight shadows from the surrounding pines, but a sensation in my gut suggested otherwise. The windows troubled me most. They reflected nothing. Not the forest, not the fading light, not our approaching figures. They were black voids cut into the wooden walls, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "Should we knock?" Anna asked when we reached the small clearing. I felt invisible eyes boring into us from every direction. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even a whisper of wind through the trees. "Maybe we should just try the handle," I suggested, though touching that door filled me with inexplicable dread. As we circled the cabin, I noticed something disturbing. From each new angle, the interior visible through the windows rearranged itself. A fireplace on the north wall appeared on the east. Furniture shifted positions. I saw a staircase leading up, though the cabin's exterior suggested a single-story structure. The temperature plummeted as the last light faded. Within minutes, it went from chilly to bone-achingly cold. Anna shivered violently beside me, her thin jacket providing little protection against the sudden icy air. "We have to go inside," I said finally, my breath forming dense clouds. "We'll freeze out here." As we approached the front door, the feeling of being observed intensified. The hairs on my neck stood up, and my skin prickled with goosebumps unrelated to the cold. Anna reached toward the handle. But before her fingers could touch it, the door swung inward with a low creak, as if inviting us in. We exchanged alarmed glances, but the biting cold left us no choice. We stepped over the threshold into relative warmth. The moment we were inside, the door swung shut behind us with a definitive click that sounded disturbingly final. The sound hit me like a physical blow. I instantly knew we'd made a terrible mistake. The outside world suddenly felt impossibly distant, as if that simple wooden door had become a barrier between us and everything familiar and safe.
"Did you see that?"
Anna whispered, her voice tight with fear. "It closed by itself." "It's probably just the wind," I said, though we both knew there had been no wind outside. Our initial relief at finding shelter quickly curdled into something darker as we took in our surroundings. The cabin appeared normal enough at first glance. Rustic furniture, a cold fireplace, dust-covered surfaces. But something about the space felt fundamentally wrong, as if the dimensions didn't quite add up or the angles weren't entirely right. Silence has a way of amplifying the smallest sounds until they become your entire world. In that cabin, the absence of normal noises, no wind in the eaves, no settling of old wood, created a vacuum that something else was eager to fill. The first whisper was so faint I thought I'd imagine it, until I saw the look of horror on Anna's face, and knew she'd heard it too. We tried to settle in despite our unease. I found an old blanket in a trunk and draped it over the dusty sofa, while Anna examined the fireplace to see if it might work. The cabin smelled of mildew and something else I couldn't quite identify. Not quite decay, but something equally unwelcome. We moved cautiously through the space, as if afraid to disturb whatever presence lingered there.
Did you hear that?
Anna whispered after we'd been there about an hour. I froze in place, listening. A soft scratching emanated from inside the walls, like fingernails dragging across wood. At first, I dismissed it as mice, but the sound tracked our movements with deliberate precision as we moved across the cabin. "It's just the old structure," I said, not believing my own words. "Probably pipes or something." But we both knew there were no pipes visible anywhere in this primitive shelter. The shadows were the next to betray the cabin's true nature. From the corner of my eye, I saw darkness itself stretching toward Anna, elongating like fingers reaching for her hair. When I turned to look directly, the shadow snapped back to its normal shape. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "Nothing," I lied, "just tired eyes playing tricks." But they weren't tricks. As night deepened, the shadows retreated whenever we looked directly at them, only to creep forward again when our attention wavered, creating an exhausting vigilance. The temperature shifts came next. While examining a bookshelf, I suddenly felt as if I'd stepped into a freezer. The air dropped 20 degrees in an instant, my breath clouding. I stepped back, and the cold pocket moved with me. "Anna," I called out, "come feel this." But by the time she crossed the room, the cold had vanished, only to reappear around her instead. These pockets of bone-chilling cold circled us, appearing and disappearing without warning, like an invisible entity testing our reactions. The photographs on the walls transformed when we weren't looking. A stone bridge became a dark forest path. Faces morphed from smiling to grimacing. Sunny days turned to stormy nights. In one particularly disturbing transformation, a family portrait slowly changed until all figures faced away from the camera. "It's just the light," Anna insisted, her voice trembling. Or maybe someone collected similar photographs. We tried desperately to normalize what was happening, but as midnight approached, these rationalizations crumbled. The ambient silence was like a sensory deprivation chamber, making every tiny noise seem thunderous. The scratching evolved into murmurs hovering just beyond comprehension, rising and falling like an ancient chant. Each sound felt magnified by the profound isolation surrounding our cabin, as if we'd been cut off from the normal world and placed somewhere sound itself had different rules. Most disturbing was how they responded to our emotions. When Anna gasped, the murmurs accelerated. When I attempted to calm myself, they subsided to barely audible whispers. Our world contracted to just this cabin and its sounds. The isolation was complete. No cars on distant roads, no airplanes overhead, not even night birds or insects outside. All we could hear were those sounds, steadily growing more distinct, filling the void with their terrible suggestions. The isolation wrapped around us like a shroud, and in our desperate need to prove we weren't going mad, we pulled out our phones to document what was happening. I held my breath as Anna aimed her camera at the empty hallway. The flash illuminated the darkness for just a second, but that was enough. As she looked down at the screen, her face drained of color. She dropped her phone like it had burned her and backed away.
"There is someone standing in the hallway,"
she whispered, her voice breaking. "Look." I picked up her phone with trembling fingers. The photograph showed the empty hallway we'd both been staring at, except it wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood at the far end, its features blurred but unmistakably human-shaped, watching us. I glanced back at the hallway. Nothing, just darkness and dust. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing as we took more photos. Each new image revealed something our eyes couldn't perceive. Figures watching from doorways, faces peering around corners. In one video, a shadow detached itself from the wall and drifted closer to where Anna stood, completely unaware. The brutal war between what we knew to be real and what we were experiencing toward our sanity. How do you process seeing someone standing behind you in a photograph when you were alone in the room? I jerked upright when I heard a scraping sound. The rocking chair that had been facing the fireplace was now turned toward us. As we watched, frozen in place, a coffee mug on the small table beside it slowly, deliberately, slid across the wooden surface, moving with purpose, as if guided by an invisible hand. Did you see that? Anna's voice was barely audible. The temperature plummeted. Our breath clouded in front of us, and the window beside the sofa fogged over. Handprint began to appear on the glass, distorted shapes with too many fingers, palm impressions impossibly large and elongated. They formed one after another, as if a crowd of invisible beings were pressing against the glass, trying to get in, or perhaps trying to get out. "We need to leave," I said, standing up, but Anna was fixated on something tucked between the sofa cushions. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Look at this," she said, her voice steadier now, almost attached. She flipped through the journal, revealing entries dating back to 1932. Each described the same phenomena we were experiencing: the whispers, the cold spots, the moving objects. One from 1954 described seeing figures in photographs that weren't visible to the naked eye. Another from 1967 mentioned handprints appearing on windows with fingers that stretched like claws.
What are the chances,
Anna whispered, that dozens of strangers over decades could hallucinate the identical nightmare? I stood up to pace, tried to think clearly despite the mounting terror. That's when I noticed a door I was certain hadn't been there before. The cabin was reconfiguring itself like a puzzle box, each room shifting and connecting in ways that defied physical reality. "Don't," Anna warned as I moved toward it, but I had to understand what was happening to us. I pulled the door open wider. The space stretched impossibly far, defying the cabin structure. Instead of the exterior wall that should have been there, a corridor extended into infinity. The air that wafted from it was stale and ancient. When I turned back to tell Anna, I froze. She was staring down at her arm in horror. 3 perfect lines had appeared on her skin, angry red scratches that hadn't been there moments before. When she held her arm up to the mirror above the fireplace, the reflection revealed the truth. The scratches spelled out a word: stay, but not in English, not in any language I recognized. Yet, somehow, looking at it in the mirror, we both understood exactly what it meant. That single, imprinted word was our last shared experience of night. By midnight, the cabin had transformed into something unrecognizable. The furniture now stood in configurations that defied physics, while the walls seemed to have retreated, creating a space far larger than what we'd initially entered. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was hallucinating, but Anna's gas confirmed she was seeing it too. At least, I thought she was seeing it too.
The floor is moving,
I whispered, pointing to the wooden planks that appeared to be undulating like gentle waves on a pond. Anna looked where I was pointing and furrowed her brow. "What are you talking about? The floor is perfectly still." Her eyes narrowed. "But why is that bookshelf bleeding?" I turned toward the shelf she indicated. The wood was dry and normal. "There's nothing there," I said, a sliver of ice forming in my stomach. That was the beginning of our divide. The malevolence inhabiting this place had developed a new strategy, customizing our horrors, driving a wedge between our shared reality. "You brought us here on purpose, didn't you?" Anna suddenly accused, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Her eyes reflected a suspicion I'd never seen before, as if a stranger wore my wife's face. I could see the terror behind her accusation, the desperate search for someone to blame. "That's insane," I countered, backing away. "My car broke down. You were there. Was I? She challenged, her fingers trembling. Or did you just tell me that's what happened? The cabin seemed to feed on our disintegrating trust. As our voices rose, the temperature plummeted, frost forming on the windows in intricate patterns. The whispers intensified with each accusation we hurled. We retreated to opposite corners of the room. I huddled near what had once been the fireplace, now merely a dark indentation. Anna crouched beside the front door, which appeared to have multiplied into 3 identical entrances, all slightly open. Can you see the doors? I called across to her. She didn't answer, just rocked back and forth, muttering something I couldn't catch. What terrified me most wasn't the cabin's impossible architecture, but the growing certainty that the woman across the room wasn't my wife anymore. Her movements were wrong, too fluid then too jerky. When she spoke, there was a half-second delay between her lips moving and sound emerging. Time stretched unnaturally. My watch claimed only 7 minutes had passed since our last exchange, yet felt like hours. Another weapon in the cabin's arsenal. Anna, my voice cracking. We need to stick together. That's what it wants, to separate us. She looked up, her face contorted. How do I know you're even real? Maybe I'm alone here, and you're just another trick. As our distrust deepened, the whispers became more coherent, feeding off our fear. By dividing us, the cabin had doubled its feast. I made one final attempt to bridge the gap, crossing the room despite every instinct screaming to stay put. As I approached, Anna's eyes widened in terror.
Who are you?
She demanded, her voice rising to a shrill cry.
What have you done with my husband?
Something in me broke. The final thread of hope that we might face this together. The cabin had successfully severed our connection, our 5 years of marriage dissolving in a single night. I'm right here, I pleaded, reaching for her hand. She screamed when I touched her, as if my skin burned like acid. Her rejection was physical, violent. She shoved me away with strength I didn't know she possessed, sending me sprawling across the floor. As I lay there rejected by my own wife, the cabin seemed to exhale with satisfaction. Like our broken connection was exactly what it had been waiting for. The digital clock blinked to 3 a.m., and that's when the real horror began. The boundary between Anna and me, between us and the cabin, between reality and nightmare, they collapsed entirely. Anna and I locked eyes across the room, our mutual terror creating one final bridge between us. We made a desperate, wordless decision to escape. I lunged for the front door, yanking it open with enough force to tear the hinges, only to stumble into the main room again. The same furniture, the same shadows. Anna appeared from what should have been the bathroom. Confusion etched across her face. She tried another exit and failed just as I had.
Every door leads back here,
she whispered, her voice thin with fear. I've tried 3 different ones. I rushed to the nearest window. Instead of the dark forest we'd walked through hours before, a vast desert bathed in shiny red moonlight stretched before me. When Anna looked, she gasped, describing an ocean of black water with something massive moving beneath the surface. The landscapes transformed whenever we tried to focus, reality itself becoming fluid. The wooden panels around us pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The grain flowed like liquid, forming patterns that resembled a language I almost understood. I reached out, transfixed, and the surface rippled at my touch, warm and yielding like skin.
I can feel it thinking,
Anna murmured, pressing her palm against the wall. It's studying us. Pressure built behind my eyes until tears formed. The taste of copper pennies filled my mouth. I turned to tell Anna, but froze when I realized I could hear her thoughts. Fragments of terror and confusion that weren't spoken aloud. Asterisk, I can't tell where I end and it begins anymore. Is this still my body? Asterisk. Her thought resonated perfectly in my mind. When our eyes met again, I knew she'd heard mine too. Something else mingled with our thoughts. Whispers that weren't ours. Fragment of consciousness that felt ancient and alien. It's absorbing us. I said it in a hollow voice. Our identities are dissolving into it. The mirror on the far wall captured my attention. My reflection stood there, moving independently of me. It turned its head before I did, smiled when I was frowning, Its hands pressed against the glass from inside, leaving imprints that remained even as it moved away. Anna's scream pulled me back. She stared at her reflection in the window, watching perform actions she hadn't taken. Her reflection raised a hand to its mouth seconds before the real Anna did the same.
We're not the first. We're not the first.
She whispered, her voice strange and doubled. I can feel them all inside me now. Everyone who's ever been trapped here. Memories that weren't mine flooded my consciousness. A young couple in 1950s clothing, huddled in the corner. A solitary hiker from the 1970s, scratching desperately at the walls. Dozens of others, their experiences overlapping, their identities merging with the cabin's consciousness. We existed in a threshold moment, caught between our separate selves and complete absorption. The cabin was a living entity feeding on our identities, adding our narratives to a collection. When dawn finally came, it wasn't the salvation we prayed for. The first rays of sun streamed through windows that suddenly showed the normal forest again. The doors opened to the outside world. We were free to leave, physically, but as we stumbled out into the morning light, I knew with absolute certainty that significant portions of our identities remained trapped within those walls. And worse, we had taken pieces of the cabin with us. Physically, we are the same, but mentally we still experience those events non-stop. I would wake up from dreams that I were in that cabin. In my every new place I move to, I feel the walls caving in and the corners dark at every time of the day. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want to watch more videos like this.